How to evaluate positions while attacking? It's one of the very common questions. While you're into the attack, you need to calculate various different positions, and therefore you need to be able to somehow evaluate them, evaluate the quality of different moves so that you know whether it's time to start attacking or not, whether a certain attacking idea is good or bad. How can you do this? We're going to find out very soon. Here's the first example between Herman Thomas and Jean-Pierre Frank. It is white to play. What do you think about this position? Like, is it favorable for white or for black, or maybe it's equal or unclear position? What do you think? Initially, it may seem like the position is like unclear or maybe approximately equal because the material is equal, but in reality, white is already winning. Well, I mean, it still, of course, would take some effort to prove this in reality, to convert it to a win, but white's position is winning. Why is that so? It is because white has the possibility to develop crushing attack on the king side. Why is that so? It is because we can see that there is this rook on a7, which is stuck on the queen side. There is knight there, which is also stuck on the queen side. And after the white's following move, bishop e4, we can see that even the black's queen is somewhat blocked out of the king side. It's very hard for black to bring it there. And therefore, if we would just look at the king side alone, we can see that the black's king is exposed. And even more so, it does not really have many defenders, because all this, like as we discussed earlier, queen, rook, and knight cannot really help the queen. Well, white can easily bring more pieces into his attack. He can bring the queen, he can bring the rook to g1, he can bring the other rook on g1 if necessary in the future. So for white, it's very easy to bring more pieces into the attack, while black has a hard time bringing up the defenses. And therefore, we may already conclude that this attack is going to be successful. Let's see what happened next. Black played knight b3, trying to exchange one of the white's bishops, but it's a very important piece into the white's attack. It looks at into the black's h6 pawn, so white wants to save the bishop. He plays bishop f4. Now he has a very strong threat of queen h5, basically just aiming to take queen takes h6 on the next move. Black gave check, rook g8, white retreated. By the way, you may wonder, like, how about the white skin? We said that the black skin is exposed, but the white skin is exposed as well. Well, fair enough, but the problem for black is that he cannot bring his pieces to the king side. That's the only problem. He cannot checkmate the white's king with just one rook from g8. And as for the other pieces, it's hard to bring them closer. Black played queen d8, and white played rook g1. Black traded the rooks, and well, he's still desperate. Basically, white still has this very straightforward threat of queen to h5, basically no matter what black do, and black is actually impossible to stop it. He played queen f8, and white continued queen h5. And now, even though, like, again, you may notice that it's an interesting situation. It is black to play, but basically he cannot stop the white's attack, and white has a number of attacking options. In the game, he played c4, just somehow desperately trying to deflect white from his attack. But in reality, white has so many attacking opportunities. He played rook g6 in the game, which won the game. Even easier probably was bishop to e5, trying to remove this bishop from f6 and make it possible for white to push the pawn forward, like bishop takes c5, pawn to f6 check, king h8, and queen f5. And now black is defenseless against queen to h7 checkmate. Once again, notice that in the final position, still black has that rook on a7 and knight on b3, which cannot help the black skin, and that is the reason why the white's attack was so powerful. As you can see, if you understand these general strategies, it becomes easier for you to evaluate positions. It becomes easier to know when to attack and when it's too early to do this, because you don't have to calculate all the variations. You just know, based on the analysis of resources, whether your attack is going to be successful or not. The next game is between Fink and Alokhin. It's white to play. And in this position, white decided to grab the pawn. He took queen takes c6. What do you think about this move? Is it one of the good options for white? Or is it a bad one? In fact, it's a really bad one. And let's think about this for a moment. If you just look at the position overall, you may notice that almost all of the white's pieces are still in their initial positions. And instead of developing them, white takes the time to grab the pawn. The price for this is too high because activity of your pieces is actually the main factor in chess. And therefore, spending this time to grab a little pawn is definitely a very big mistake. And sometimes people don't realize that even if you can't calculate the variations and just somehow prove, like mathematically through the calculation that black is winning here, anyway, the move like queen to take c6 strategically already puts white on a brink of disaster. Anyway, let's see what happened next. Black played bishop to d7, the queen retreated, and black castled. And in this position, it's like already an ideal situation for black, where almost all of his pieces are already active, while for white, oops, it's only the queen which is in the game. White tried to somehow develop the bishop. Black played rook to e8, also putting some pressure along the e-file. White played knight to d2, and black played rook b8. Now he's creating the threat of bishop to b5, taking advantage of the pin. And in this position, white somehow played pawn to a4. I'm not totally sure why white didn't want to castle instead. It was probably a mistake. Anyway, he played pawn to a4 to stop black from playing bishop b5. And black played queen to e7. Once again, notice that right now it's just an absolutely perfect situation for black, with all of his pieces being active, very active in the game, and for white, like he tried to develop two of his minor pieces, they're still extremely passive, and of course the centralized king is a major problem for white. White played knight to f1 because otherwise there is no way to develop this dark squared bishop, but now black can win the game right away. Can you find the winning move for black here? It's the move bishop to b5, which interrupts this connection between the white's bishop and the queen. And therefore, after white captured the bishop, black just captured the bishop on e2, delivering a checkmate. It's just a quick example that shows you that sometimes, even without calculating variations too much, you can already see that a certain move is definitely wrong, and you can do this simply by evaluating a quantity of pieces that you have in the game, a quantity of pieces that are active. And certainly the main conclusion is that always care about the activity of your pieces on the first place. This factor is more important than weak squares, center, safety of your king, or anything else. Activity of the pieces is the most dominant factor in chess overall. The last example of this lesson, the game between Bezold and White's king. It's black to play. In this position, there is an opportunity for black to sacrifice an exchange here on h3, even though the consequences are very unclear. Let's just take a look what may happen if black tries to start an attack by this sacrifice. Let's say black takes there, white may recapture, black recaptures with a queen, and right now he's threatening queen h1 check, but it's certainly not all that easy because white can play queen f3 to cover that square. And what can black do now? If black just plays check queen h2, well, the white's king simply retreats on f1 and there is no continuation for the black's attack. Otherwise, it's not very clear what else can black do here, and it may seem like this sacrifice just does not work for black, because again, there is no forcing continuation for the black's attack. But there is one general idea that you may use. You may calculate the quantity of pieces on the king side, on the side of your attack. If you focus your attention on a king side alone, and simply calculate the quantity of pieces there, you can see that black has 3 pieces, queen, rook, and knight, versus white's single queen, which means that on the side of your attack you have decisive advantage in the forces, and that is a clear sign that your attack should probably be successful. This is a very simple method, so feel free to use it in all of your games and all of your calculations. Before starting your attack on a king side or a queen side, just compare the quantity of pieces of yours and of your opponent on this area of the board. And black just continued. He played knight to g4, bringing the knight closer to the area of the attack. White played queen g2, trying to kick away the black's queen, so black retreated, queen h5, white played rook c1, and it may seem like, there is nothing that black can do here, but he played knight h2. Again, in order to attack, we just need to move forward and bring our pieces closer to the opponent's king. And the idea of black here is that if white just tries doing something like anything, b5 or any other move, black has a pretty interesting checkmating idea. He's gonna play queen to e2 to cover that f1 square so that the white's king cannot escape there, and after that on the next move to play knight f3 check, and it's almost a checkmate. White would have to give up his queen. Quite interesting checkmating position, and again it only happens because black has so much more pieces on the king side. Noticing this, on the previous move instead of b5, white decided to play g4, giving the pawn. Black just captured that pawn, white played pawn to b5, and black simply came back to his initial idea. He played knight h2, after white took on c6. It may seem like white is succeeding on the queen side, but black just realizes his plan persistently. He plays queen a2, and even though white grabbed some pawns on the queen side, there is actually nothing he can do versus the black's very simple threat, knight to f3 checkmate. In the game, white took that bishop on e5, trying to somehow deflect black, but it's also quite instructive how black always ignores the white's moves. He does not react to them, he just continues realizing his plan. So he played knight to f3, white had to give up the queen, black recaptured, and now it seems like white had a little bit of success on the queen side, but it's certainly a very little one because black just grabbed the queen, so black is still ahead in material, and the black's king is really in safety. It can always go back to a8 if necessary, so there's nothing that white can do really. White played bishop h2, because otherwise queen h1 was a threat, and black continued queen h3. And in this position, white gave the final check, black retreated to a8, and white resigned. Black is gonna play queen takes h2 on the next move, and if bishop goes away somewhere, anywhere, black just goes queen h1 checkmate. Pretty interesting game, and it's interesting in a couple of senses. First of all, it's interesting to see how black was persistent in realizing his plan, and he always simply ignored white's attacking ideas. He was trying to persist in his whole plan, and he succeeded. And the second thing is the idea of evaluating the quantity of pieces of yours and of your opponents on the area of your attack. And if you notice that you have advantage, it probably means that your attack is going to be successful. And this can save you a lot of time and effort, because you don't have to calculate a lot of very complex variations. You just can have this general strategic understanding, and this will help you to navigate you through these variations very easily, because you know which kind of positions should be in your favor. I hope it helps. That's been this idea of how you can evaluate your chances for the attack. And it's also one of the ways for you to simplify your process of finding the right moves. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I look forward to see you in the final lesson of this video course in the next one.